Hey everybody, it's Mr. Bliss. This video is about the respiratory system. It is the third body system that we've covered in this series of videos. We did the digestive system, then the circulatory system, and this is the respiratory system. There will be more, but this particular video is bringing us to talk about the concept of respiration in general. So, what is respiration? Normally when you hear that word respire, what you think of is breathing, breathing in, breathing out, and that is what the respiratory system does. But in biology, that word respiration actually has a deeper meaning. It has a whole process that isn't covered simply within the respiratory system. Respiration or cell respiration happens in your cells, in cells with nuclei, so anything that also have mitochondria. And this is the process here, draw a little arrow, of respiration. This is the formula. So you get oxygen and you combine it with glucose, and these together, when you add these two together, these are our reactants. These are what go into the equation, oxygen and glucose. And what you get out, and this is what this little yield sign here means. It means it's almost like an equal sign. What you get out is carbon dioxide, which is, as we know, the gas that you breathe out, water, and energy. So respiration is all about energy. It's the reason why it happens. Your cells need energy in order to do their cellular processes, and respiration is the way that they do that. So in the last video that we did on the digestive system, we talked about how we obtain glucose. It's in the foods that we eat. It comes from plants, but it's in the foods that we eat, and your body breaks it down, and it goes into the bloodstream, and that bloodstream brings that glucose to your body cells, those cells with the mitochondria. The respiratory system, this video is all about how you get your oxygen, and it shouldn't be a surprise to you when you breathe, you get oxygen. However, your air that you're breathing in is not all oxygen. It's a mixture of gases, and 78% of it is nitrogen, which you cannot make use of. But that small bit of oxygen that you bring in is vital. So underneath that general formula here is our molecular formula. So we here have our same reactants. We have our yield sign, and here are our carbon dioxide and our water and our energy, our ATP energy. And collectively these are known as our products of the reaction. And so if we were to count up all of the things that were included in the reactants, let's take oxygens for example. Well, we have 6 molecules of O2, okay, oxygen gas, and so that means that we have 12 oxygen atoms, and then we also have 6 more in this glucose molecule, so instead of 12 we have 18 total. Well, if we took a look on the right side and we counted up our oxygens, we have 6 CO2 molecules, so there's another 12, and then we also have 6 in our water, so we have 18. And the same thing happens for each one of those atoms that we try to balance. So the same amount of oxygens, the same amount of carbons, the same amount of hydrogens. So where does this ATP come from? Where does this energy come from? Well, it's actually stored in the bonds of our glucose. We said that glucose is all about energy. It provides quick energy to the body, and it's stored chemically within the bonds of that glucose. So you may remember that, that is a bad glucose molecule, but this is our rough glucose. It's a ring structure, carbons and hydrogens and oxygens, and that energy is stored between the bonds here. And when it gets broken down, that energy gets released, and the body makes use of that energy by storing it within these ATP molecules. So how does the body take oxygen and incorporate it into the rest of this equation? That's where the respiratory system comes in. So here is our outline of a human. They are genderless. And so let's take a look at all of the parts of the respiratory system here. At the top, you have your nasal and oral cavities. And this is where you end up bringing air into the body. And it's important to note that your nasal cavity is lined with cilia and things that are designed to trap bacteria, and also has mucus. Okay, those are your boogers and things. But that catches dust and debris and all kinds of things that may carry bacteria to prevent it from getting into your lungs. So after that, your air enters the back of the throat, which is called the pharynx. And then it passes through this structure that's known as the larynx. And this is where your vocal folds are. We used to call them vocal cords, now we call them vocal folds. And as air passes over them, actually when it passes over them the other way, coming out, that vibrates your vocal folds, and that's how you create your voice. This is generally why men who have larger larynxes tend to have deeper voices, and women who tend to have smaller, and children too, who tend to have smaller larynxes, have higher pitched voices. It's the same as if you've ever used a guitar. Those thicker strings produce lower frequency notes. So as air is passing through here, it goes to this tube here that is known as the trachea. And unlike the esophagus that we talked about in the digestive system, which actually runs behind the trachea like this, there's actually a little fork in the road here that decides whether or not food will go down the esophagus or air will go down the trachea. So sometimes when people say, "Oh, it went down the wrong pipe," they literally mean it went down the wrong pipe. And you have a structure on the back of your tongue called the epiglottis that can block your trachea when you're swallowing food. So anyway, your trachea is unique in that it's lined with rings of cartilage. C-A-R, cartilage. And cartilage is not like bone, but it is connection tissue, and it's strong, and it provides structure for the trachea. And the reason why it's there is, imagine if you were laying on your back while you were sleeping, and your trachea kind of was able to just kind of flop closed. Well, you would end up having like a blockage. You would choke in your sleep, which is not ideal. So this cartilage is here to provide its structure, almost like the poles in a tent. After the trachea, you have this branching here, and the branches go off to the left and the right, and these are known as your bronchi. And it is important to note that the one that I just labeled here is the right bronchus. Why is it the right? That is the left side of the diagram. Well, you have to imagine that this is inside of this human being, and this would be this person's right arm, and this would be this person's left arm. So you have to label it as though it belonged to that person. So you have your right bronchus, and then over here you have your left bronchus. After the bronchi, you can see that you have some further splitting, almost like smaller branches in a tree. And these smaller branches, these smaller airways, are known as your bronchioles. You may remember we talked a little bit about venules and arterioles, which are smaller blood vessels, smaller than veins and arteries, while bronchioles are smaller than bronchi. Then, at the base of your lungs, here, you have a muscle, and your muscle is known as the diaphragm. It's kind of a round muscle. It can flex and extend involuntarily. This is how you breathe. When this diaphragm kind of extends down like this, it allows for air to rush into the lungs with some negative pressure, almost like when you sip on a straw, liquid, whatever you're drinking, Coca-Cola or whatever, rushes up the straw. That's as a result of negative pressure. Same thing happens here. As your diaphragm dips down, air rushes into your lungs, and when it extends this way, okay, then that pushes the air out of your lungs. Now, you may have noticed that I have this big zoomed-in picture here. That is zoomed in on these little things that look a little bit like raspberries. This is the end of your bronchial tubes, and they're known as your alveoli, or alveoli. They're kind of pronounced both ways. And they're essentially little air sacs. So as air comes in, it fills your bronchioles, and then it flows into your alveoli, which inflate. And these alveoli are the end of your air passages, and they are lined with capillaries. And that's actually really important because this is where the diffusion happens of gases into your bloodstream. So this is a zoomed in image of one of your alveoli, known as an alveolus. This is one of these air sacs here. And you'll see that we have our capillary here on the left, and you have your red blood cells that are coming by. And red blood cells carry gases. They're important in gas exchange. And so here, the oxygen gas that came into your lungs when you breathed in is diffusing right through the membrane, into the red blood cell here. And as that happens, carbon dioxide that was picked up in your cells as waste is being sent out of those cells into the alveolus. And as that diaphragm pushes up again, it's going to be forced back the other way, out of your bronchioles, through your bronchi, up your trachea, across your larynx, up through your pharynx, and you can either breathe out of your mouth or out of your nose. So just as a reminder, this right here was when we talked about our circulatory system. You have your pulmonary loop here, and you also have your systemic loop here. So from the heart to the lungs and back is your pulmonary loop. This is where that gas exchange happens in the lungs. And as that happens, your fresh, newly oxygenated blood comes to your heart, and that heart pumps your newly fresh oxygenated blood to your cells. And that's where that oxygen goes into your cells. It interacts with your mitochondria, and cell respiration happens, and that's where you get your ATP. So just a reminder, this is the equation. This is the equation that we're looking at here. You have your oxygen that's combining with that glucose being used in a process known as cell respiration. We'll get into that later on in the year. And as a result, you end up with products of carbon dioxide, water, and this very important energy that's going to be used by your cells. Anyway, that is your respiratory system. Hope you enjoyed it. Let me know if you have any questions, and I can try to answer them in the comments. Thanks.